Roronoa Zoro. The first mate of the Straw Hats is effortlessly cool and has left countless bodies in his wake all down the Grand Line. He is one of the mightiest warriors in the entire One Piece world, almost undefeated on the field of battle. Nothing will stop his quest to rise to the top and become the world's greatest swordsman. Or so it seems. What if I told you there is a hidden secret in Zoro's past? One that turns his lifelong dream into a cruel joke. There is a hidden weakness at the heart of Three Sword style that may force Zoro to abandon everything he has learned up until now, or fail in his quest to take that coveted title. Don't believe me? Well, keep watching and see for yourself. In this video, we will be looking back at Zoro's history and exposing a hidden truth that has defined his life. Let's get to it. Part 1. What we know. Let's go over the basics first. Zoro was born 21 years ago in Shimotsuki village. His hometown has a bit of a story to it. It was founded by pirates around 55 years ago. Specifically, they were a band of rogue samurai from Wano, led by the legendary smith Shimotsuki Kozaburo. His men defeated a group of bandits on this small East Blue Island and stayed to teach the locals how to defend themselves. It was here that Kozaburo fell in love. The group halted their travels, founding the village that bears his name. This may also be when the family's Ishin Dojo was founded. It's a little unclear if it was begun by Kozaburo himself as part of his teaching of the town, or if it was the project of his son Koshiro instead. Speaking of Zoro's old sensei, he may have a history in the outside world. We know that Ishin Dojo cooperated with the Revolutionary Army 12 years ago, following the destruction of Great Terminal on Goa. It was thanks to their supplies that Ivankov and Dragon were able to relocate the refugees to Baltigo. The order to share food with the rebel ships has to have come from the dojo's master. At this time, that would be Koshiro. Was the swordsman an old friend of Dragon and Eva stepping in where needed? Or just a concerned man trying to help the refugees from Goa? Either way, Shimotsuki village has avoided being caught up in war. Zoro grew up in a serene royal town alongside his longtime rival and daughter of Koshiro, Kuina. Their competition is where Zoro's story begins. Both young swordsmen were students of Ishin Dojo. Zoro was talented, able to take on adults, but he was no match for Kuina. He fought her 2,000 times, but was unable to manage a single win. They had one final battle with real swords, after which they made a vow to both try and become the world's greatest swordsman. Unfortunately, Kuina died the next day, leaving Zoro to carry her sword and promise forward. There, all caught up. Now before we get into the more mysterious stuff, remember to check that you're subscribed to the channel, you've rung the notification bell, and hit that like button for your daily dose of plot armor. Now quickly, back on topic before we get lost like Zoro. Part 2. Bloodline. Many fans have speculated that Zoro's hometown will be a significant plot point going forward. Specifically, they have been looking at his heritage and family. His parents are unknown, leaving us free to speculate about blood ties to famous figures back in Wano. While this was once a pretty plausible idea, it is looking unlikely after chapter 1057. We had a whole arc set in the land of Zoro's ancestors, 149 chapters of story. If his heritage was going to be explored, it would have been done during this time, wouldn't it? Besides, any surprise twists like Zoro secretly being the emperor of Wano or the like would be repetitive for One Piece. Sanji had a very similar reveal in the Whole Cake Island arc. There we learned that the Vinsmoke family were actually rulers in the North Blue. We met Sanji's family, and their dealings with Big Mom drove the plot forward. This was just one arc prior to Wano, so close that it was obviously going to still be on the readers' minds. It's pretty clear that Oda never intended to go deep into Zoro's family history, at least not so soon after Sanji's. Oda might be planning to explore it more later. He has told us nothing about the men who sailed with Kozaburo from Wano. They could be revealed as important in the future. But we likely have all the information we need on Zoro's bloodline. While we don't know the identity of his parents, we have all but confirmed one key ancestor for the Roronoa clan. Shimotsuki Ryuma, the legendary samurai whom he fought at Thriller Bark. There is no direct proof tying the two together, but his living design seems similar to Zoro's. Hyoguro and Kawamatsu note that Zoro looks almost identical to one of Ryuma's descendants, Ushimaru, the former daimyo of Ringo. This is all a cute reference to Oda's prior one-shot manga, Monsters, which star Ryuma. It's fun, but unlikely to play a big part in the story of One Piece. Now, if you want to find a real hint to where Zoro's story is going, it comes in one of the most mysterious aspects of his character: his relationship with cursed swords. Part 3. Black and White Blades. We first learn about cursed swords fairly early on in One Piece. In Rogue Town, Zoro goes to buy new swords to replace the two he lost fighting Mihawk. Ippon Matsu, the merchant, tries to swindle him out of his remaining sword. Fortunately, Sergeant Tashigi manages to thwart that plan. The Marine swordswoman happens to enter the shop and immediately geeks out over Zoro's sword. After all, it is the Wado Ichimonji, a superior grade sword worth at least 10 million berries. There is no way Ipponmatsu could offer a fair price for it. After that scheme fails, Tashigi and Zoro talk a bit as they explore the shop. Shortly afterwards, the Marine Sergeant finds a sword she recognizes in a barrel of cheap, blunt blades. Tashigi identifies it as Sandai Kitetsu, a famous sword worth a full million berries to 100 times what the shop is asking for. However, even money-hungry Ipponmatsu balks at selling Zoro the Kitetsu, which is odd considering he had it out on his shop floor. Curiously, Zoro is able to identify it as a cursed blade simply by its feel. Since he hadn't encountered such a weapon before, it's a little odd that he was able to pick up on that. Ipponmatsu does not try to deny Zoro's words. Instead, he elaborates. The smith explains that weapons like Kitetsu are as much a danger to their wielders as they are to their opponents. While famous swordsmen of the past have wielded them, each one supposedly died a tragic death. It's interesting that Ipponmatsu is the one telling us this. In the same scene, we have Tashigi, a young idealist with an in-depth knowledge of swords. It would make sense that she would take such a romanticized belief seriously, even if it was just a story. Ipponmatsu, the money-hungry materialist, seems like he wouldn't care about a vague rumor. But no, he is utterly convinced that cursed blades are a legitimate threat. That strongly suggests that he has had some intimate experience with them in the past. After all, Kitetsu has to have ended up in his shop somehow. Despite his low opinion of Zoro, Ipponmatsu utterly refuses to sell him the blade, worrying that doing so will pass the curse on to him. If I sold you that weapon, it would be as if I killed you myself. Of course, this completely backfires. Zoro being Zoro, the potential danger of the sword just makes him even more excited by it. Over Ipponmatsu's objections, he grabs the Sandai Kitetsu and flips it into the air. He holds his entire arm out, daring the Kitetsu to cut it off. Somehow, this insane stunt worked out. The sword twists and tumbles straight past Zoro, leaving his arm without a scratch. Ipponmatsu is so impressed, he gives Zoro not only the Sandai Kitetsu, but also his family sword, Yubashiri. For a long time, this moment was unexplained. How was Zoro able to defy a deadly curse like this? Fans put it down to pure luck, Zoro's spirit, or a connection with the sword. This scene wasn't seen as something of plot significance. It was just one more badass moment from our favorite swordsman. However, Wano offers us a potential explanation for Zoro's mastery of the Kitetsu. When handed Enma, a legendarily dangerous blade, Zoro is able to adapt to its demands shockingly quickly. This is a sword that usually kills those that even draw it, greedily guzzling down their haki. It reduced Zoro's arm to a withering husk after a single swing. The Red Scabbards were amazed at his great control over the sword of the underworld. Only Sukiyaki, however, seemed to grasp why Enma and Zoro had such a connection. Later, during training, the old smith explains it to Zoro. His lack for wielding Enma likely comes from the fact that he bears the Wado Ichimonji. The two blades were forged by the same legendary smith, Shimotsuki Kozaburo. Sukiyaki reasons that they must be similar enough that Wado helped prepare Zoro for wielding Enma, and it is this idea that opens up a big question. If the two swords are so similar, how far does that go? Enma is outright destructive to its wielders. Is Kozaburo's other sword similar? Is the Wado Ichimonji a cursed blade? It would explain Zoro's overall tolerance for dangerous weapons. He has been using one throughout his adventures, from the Ichimonji to the Sandai Kitetsu and now to Enma. He has had almost half his life to get used to a curse weighing him down. It even explains how he was able to identify the Kitetsu as cursed simply by its feel. It is stronger than what he is used to, but it is a familiar sensation. There is no record of the Ichimonji bearing a curse, but technically speaking, Enma isn't cursed either. The Meito blades each possess unique properties, so there could be some subtle effect to the Wado that works similarly to Enma. If so, it offers an alternative explanation to Kuina's death. We know Enma can slay its wielder. Its sister sword may be able to do the same. The dojo's trainees only ever use wooden swords as a rule. Kuina's final match with Zoro was the first time she used the Wado Ichimonji. If the straight road of peace drains a wielder's haki like Enma does, it could have caught her unaware. Either it drank too deeply of Kuina's life force, or it took enough from her to make her unsteady on her feet. Notably, Kuina's face after death was hidden, leaving the nature of her wounds unconfirmed. Either option would explain Koshiro's sad comment. Looking down at his daughter's corpse, human beings are so fragile. As to why the curse didn't affect Zoro, well, that was explained in Wano. Didn't you notice? Part 4. The Smith. It all comes back to Shimotsuki Kozaburo. The old man was a legend, forged multiple great swords, and escaped from a sealed Wano. He led a pretty extraordinary life. Given how many amazing things he did, it's interesting how little is known about him. In particular, one question sticks out. Why did he leave Wano in the first place? He was not only a samurai, but related to a daimyo's family. Kozaburo chose to forsake a good life by heading out to sea. This is a guy who could have been living in luxury with fine meals and silken clothes. He could have been happily partying at the fire festival every year. Instead, he ended his days in a tiny fishing village in the East Blue. Why did he go down that path? Well, while we know little of his history in Wano, out at sea, Kozaburo was being hunted by the Navy. That's not exactly a good sign of his character. While the old smith claims Enma was his masterpiece, that doesn't mean he stopped working after he made it. Kozaburo was likely making swords for a good while after fleeing Wano. He was a legendary smith after all, and he had to earn a living. Given his expressed philosophy about cursed blades, any sword he sold would likely be dangerous to its wielder. All it would take is a few of those weapons ending up in marine hands for Kozaburo to get a bounty on his head. With that, settling down somewhere out of the way must have seemed like a smart idea. So Kozaburo made a lot of cursed weapons? We can't prove that, but it fits with what we saw of him. The old man wouldn't use that term, but he takes pride in making dangerous blades. To him, a sword must be as deadly as possible to have value. A blade that isn't dangerous is nothing. Such a weapon isn't even worth a single berry. It's been said a sword has a will of its own, and the blades Kozaburo made likely reflected the smith's beliefs. That's what makes them so violent. Someone who can't master a sword like that, who would be afraid of a sword like that, Kozaburo dismisses as a weakling. It would be ironic if, after his death, his granddaughter lost her life to such a blade. Was Kuina a weakling? I doubt Zoro would think so. She was a girl who beat him 2001 times. The person he dreamed of one day defeating. She shared her fears with Zoro. She swore to try and become the world's greatest swordsman with him. It seems unfair to dismiss her as a weak child. But if we are going with this theory, how come the Ichimonji claimed her life and not Zoro's? Well, Zoro's got one thing Kuina didn't. A set of Kozaburo forged blades. The old man dismissed them as low quality, but that does not matter. They are still his work. If the Wado Ichimonji helped Zoro tolerate Enma, it makes sense that these swords would help build his tolerance for the Wado. Even if they aren't named blades, they are forged by the same man. They have to have some similarities. But even training with real swords was not enough for Zoro to beat Kuina. Even then, she had an understanding that he did not. She was on a different path. Part 5. The Parable of Muramasa and Masamune. Kozaburo and Zoro's philosophy on swords is very reminiscent of an old Japanese folktale. It concerns two of the country's most famous smiths, Sengo Muramasa and Goro Nudo Masamune. The two supposedly held a contest to judge who was able to forge a superior blade, the hot-headed Muramasa or his wise old master Masamune. Each worked hard to create a legendary sword. When the time came to judge the contest, the two walked to a bridge, hanging their blades below with the cutting edge facing against the current. That way, everything that flowed past would be tested against the blade. Muramasa dubbed his sword the Juchi Yosamu, 10,000 cold nights. It could cut anything placed before it. Fish, leaves, pebbles, even the air itself. You could not make a more dangerous blade. Masamune's sword was a Yawarakai Tei, gentle hands. While this sword too could cut leaves, the fish would swim up to it and go by unharmed. The air would blow by, brushing against either side of the sword without a sound. It is said that Muramasa laughed at his master, calling him out. What kind of sword can't even cut air? But the story goes that while both men had created masterpieces, Masamune's blade was in truth the better weapon. Muramasa's blade would indeed cut through anything, but that made it a dangerous sword that saw no distinction between the deserving and not. A blade like that could take its wielder's life or the lives of those they care about. The 10,000 cold nights was pure power, but lacked any restraint. The gentle hands, on the other hand, was a refined blade, one that cut only what its wielder intended to cut. It spared the innocent and undeserving, using just the amount of force needed and nothing more. It was a sword that could cut nothing. Now this legend is clearly ahistorical. Muramasa and Masamune were real people, but lived in entirely different eras. They could not have met like this. Nonetheless, the idea that Muramasa's blades are cursed swords grew pretty widespread. Tragedies amongst famous samurai, be they senseless murders or unfortunate suicides, were linked to their wielding of Muramasa's blades. His name and that story are pretty synonymous with the idea of a cursed sword in Japan. A blade that holds so much evil within it, the owner may be overcome. Old Man Kozaburo may be the Muramasa of the One Piece world. He doesn't seem like a curse-throwing villain. We know he saved innocent people back in the day. All the same, it's worth noting that his skills have dulled with age. He is not the same old wise sage who knows everything there is to know about his craft. He is a bitter old man whose glory days are long behind him, dodgily sticking to the short-sighted beliefs that saw him through his life. The same beliefs he implanted into Wado Ichimonji and Enma. That power and destructive force are all that matters in a blade. This might make his son Koshiro the Masamune of our story. While he is no smith, we saw him impart a similar philosophy to Zoro. To Koshiro, the pinnacle of swordsmanship is the power to protect what one wishes to protect and cut what one wishes to cut. He goes on to outright counter his father's belief that a great weapon must be dangerous. To Koshiro, a blade that injures all it touches isn't really a sword. Zoro didn't understand what his master meant at the time. Even as an adult, he has had trouble with it. And to be fair to Zoro, this lesson was always going to be hard for him. He was already on a different path. He was known as Two-Blade Zoro in the dojo. His whole style was built around these wild swinging attacks. As an adult, three-sword style is more refined, slick, dangerous, and cool. But it is still rooted in that same aggression and urge to win he had as a child. The violent, cut-everything focus passed down by Kozaburo has shaped Zoro's style. If these swords had been draining his haki all this time, naturally, he'd have to focus on adapting to that. Compensating for the curse pushed Zoro to strengthen his will and physical might over anything else. Think of it like a man growing up on a planet with heavier gravity than Earth's. Since every move would take more effort, it's natural he would have to grow strong to live in a place like that. But in turn, it is going to limit his ability to move faster. He is used to every movement taking concentrated force to pull off. It's a trade-off, just like Zoro's three-sword style is. And the trade-off can sting if your enemy takes advantage of it. Part 6. The End of the Road. The story of One Piece is reaching its final saga. The Straw Hat crew are getting even closer to Laugh Tale, and their stories are coming to a close. For Zoro, that means his rematch with Dracula Mihawk is not long away. He has fought some crazy enemies since their first encounter. There was Das Bones, a man made out of steel. There was Pika of the Doflamingo Pirates, a stone colossus who seemed unstoppable. Zoro slew an actual dragon on Punk Hazard, and most recently dueled King, the last member of the godlike Lunarian race. But is he up to Mihawk's level? Well, no. And it's not a matter of strength. Zoro aspires to be a swordsman who could cut anything, and that is the path he has gone down. But Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman, has adopted a more spiritual outlook. He showed that clearly in their first encounter, using a small blade and minimal force to effortlessly overpower Zoro. Remember that first slash from Yoru? The one that broke Zoro's original blades? Notice how it hits either side of him, but leaves Zoro himself with no further injuries. Mihawk has mastered the ability to cut nothing, like Hoshiro Sensei spoke about. We have even seen it perfected in another work. While he used anti-magic to pull it off, Black Clover's Asta has also managed to attain this ability. It truly is the mark of a great swordsman. Zoro can technically do it too. The breath of all things allows him to pick out individual objects, cutting some and not others. But Zoro only views this as his sword listening to him. He never picked up on what Koshiro's words really meant. Instead of incorporating this precision into his style, Zoro kept his focus on one goal. And that was the thing Kozaburo declared was all that mattered to a swordsman: pure strength. Almost all of Zoro's foes since Mihawk have been brutes who prioritize power, and he's developed his own abilities to match. Like any shonen protagonist, his main way out of this is simply more power. His three-sword style's moves focus on that strength, more force, more determination, learning to cut more and more. Zoro lives by the path Kozaburo set him on, the path of Wado Ichimonji. He is the swordsman who can cut anything. So far, that has worked. That approach got Zoro through the Grand Line. But unfocused strength can leave you vulnerable. If Zoro were to fight Mihawk next chapter, the fight would go exactly the same as it did back in Baratai. Because while Zoro is stronger than he was, has Enma and Haki and all those other power-ups, how he fights has not changed at all. Mihawk did not need superior strength to beat him then, and he does not need it now. Now, Mihawk likely wants Zoro to grow as a swordsman. He spared Zoro's life back then out of respect for his determination. He has helped nourish his strength over the time skip. It's likely he gave him some prompting similar to Koshiro. In the anime, this gets even more explicit. Mihawk pitted Zoro against a giant human drill swordsman that wielded a copy of Yoru. It was very clearly showing him how a stronger opponent could lose to a weaker one with more skill. But if Mihawk was trying to get Zoro to grow into a more refined swordsman, he largely failed. Zoro absolutely got stronger during the time skip, but he is still unable to pull off some of his rival's greatest feats. Hawkeye's Mihawk can turn bullets away with just a tap of Yoru. Being able to make such tiny movements with a massive, hefty blade is beyond impressive. Zoro's nature as a black blade is also worthy of note. It is likely Mihawk's trademark sword has grown so strong due to the fine control of his armament haki. Notably, other powerful haki-wielding swordsmen had not duplicated Mihawk's feat of reforging his sword. If pure power was enough to trigger this transformation, Fujitora, Shanks, and Odin would have their own black blades. The only other one we know of, Shusui, was wielded by Shimotsuki Ryuma, and it now rests in Wano. But Zoro cannot rely on his ancestors' deeds if he wants to claim the title of world's greatest swordsman. To match or surpass Mihawk, Zoro is going to need to forge his own black blade. He is going to need to perfect the art of cutting nothing. Unfortunately, doing so will be beyond difficult. The three-sword style is built around the opposite of the precision Zoro needs to close this gap. To win, he's going to have to essentially reinvent his entire style. Every move needs to be refined and exact. He desperately needs training from another swordsman. Someone who better understands the principles of control and restraint and can drill them into Zoro's moss-covered head. But unfortunately, we may be too late into the story for that. Most of those potential mentor figures currently want Zoro dead. His old master is back in the East Blue, far away from the Sunny. There is only one figure who comes to mind. They haven't been involved in the story for a while, but we do know a warrior who truly embodies these principles of restraint and care. They are also highly knowledgeable about swordscraft, even if their strength is not equal to their skill. This potential mentor is currently in the New World and owes the Straw Hat First Mate enough of a debt to help him. It might embarrass Zoro to ask, but Captain Tashigi may be his best bet here. Her assistance would be significant, but the two would still struggle to pull this off. This hypothetical rebirth of the three-sword style would be the toughest feat of swordsmanship we've seen so far from Zoro. He would have to unlearn a lifetime's worth of skills, every move we've ever seen him use, and rebuild them all from scratch. But there would be no finer way to honor Kuina's legacy or that of Koshiro. And if Zoro can pull it off, he will finally close that gap. Now that is going to be a fight for the ages. But we'll just have to wait and see. What do you think? Do you agree with this theory? Or do you think the final fight will play out differently? Be sure to leave us your thoughts in the comments down below. As always, I'm SliceOfOtaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.